Hello student, I am Professor Devashish Bose, Head, Department of Criminology and Forensic Science, Dr. HARISINGH GOUR VISHWAVIDYALAYA, SAGAR, Madhya Pradesh. Today, I am going to present a lecture of Scene of Crime, Part 4th, BSc 3rd semester on the unit Criminalistics, which has been jointly prepared by myself and Mr. Giriraj Sharma, PhD scholar, a UGC JRF at Department of Criminology and Forensic Science, Dr. HARISINGH GOUR VISHWAVIDYALAYA, SAGAR, Madhya Pradesh. Let's start our discussion while taking a look at what we are going to learn today. So today in Module 1, we will see Introduction to Biohazards at Scene of Crime. Module 2 will be Commonly Encountered Pathogens. Module 3, Tuberculosis. Module 4, Hepatitis B. Module 5, Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. Module 6, General Precautions at Crime Scene. Module 7, Specific Guidelines from Crime Scene Investigators. And finally, Module 8 will be our conclusion. So now start with Module 1, Introduction to Biohazards at Scene of Crime. My dear student, now we will discuss biohazards at the crime scene. What type of biohazards can be encountered at the crime scene? What type of precautions should be taken while dealing with the crime scene which is infected? So let's start with the biohazards. As we know that crime scenes are laden with hazards that each and every crime scene investigator, forensic team, technicians must be aware of and constantly protecting against them. So, first of all, we shall learn the meaning of the hazardous. Dear student, the dictionary meaning of the hazard is something that is dangerous and likely to cause damage. Therefore, I can say you might have understood the meaning of the hazard, but here we are studying the biohazard, that means something who is living with deadliest to human being. Dear student, hazards exist in many varieties or ways and forms. So, for the sake of convenience, we can divide it into many categories such as biological weapon, chemical weapon, explosive. All these are categories as hazards. Here we will deal with only one, that is biological weapon. Crime scene investigator and their teams may get infected with a pathogen while performing their basic crime scene duties. There are many diseases which are commonly encountered at the crime scene, or they are deadliest killer of the human once it is caught with them. Tuberculosis, Hepatitis B and AIDS all are too common in the society nowadays. Thus, investigating officer should take precaution and utmost care while dealing with any type of scene of crime, because there are tremendous examples in which personals get themselves infected by any kind of these diseases. Therefore, it should not be taken casually or lightly. There must be some serious step such as protective wearing, that is the crime scene uniform, gloves, goggles and whatever they need to fulfill their precaution. The primarily objective of this precaution guideline is that to take precaution from while dealing with the crime scene. In addition to this, another advantage of this is that by following the procedure and protocols of crime scene investigating officer can reduce the rate of contamination of physical evidence or a secondary transfer between two or object is greatly reduced. So, this is the precaution not only to prevent oneself but also to preserve the integrity of the physical evidences present at crime scene. With this, we come to the end of Module 1 and now we move on to Module 2, that is Commonly Encountered Pathogen at a Crime Scene. Dear student, now we are studying the commonly encountered pathogen at a crime scene. As we know that investigating officer may face this problem or can have high risk of hazardous when they are going to recognize physical evidences, collection of physical evidences, handling of physical evidences, transportation of physical evidences, during the time assisting the victim or during the analysis of physical evidence, etc. Dear student, now we shall learn about commonly encountered pathogens such as AIDS, Hepatitis B or TB, commonly known as tuberculosis. As we know that immediate exposure to the potential blood-borne pathogens including tuberculosis, hepatitis or AIDS make the risk for infection exponential, requiring strict compliance with safety and health-related workplace practices. So let's start with blood-borne pathogen. Dear student, blood-borne pathogens are those infectious microorganisms such as bacteria or viruses that are carried in blood and can cause disease in human. Thus, they are following types: malaria, syphilis, tuberculosis, hepatitis B, human immunodeficiency virus or commonly known as AIDS or HIV. Now we move to next module where we will discuss each commonly encountered pathogen. Module 3, tuberculosis. Dear student, now we have to discuss on tuberculosis, that is the airborne pathogen or deadliest killer of the human being. Once an investigating officer and their team members come in contact with this bacteria, then they can catch this disease. Now we will have a brief discussion about the pathogen and the transmission of this pathogen. Tuberculosis is an infectious disease and airborne pathogen caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Its main mean of transmission is through inhalation of tuberculosis pathogens. In addition to this, depending on the environment, these tiny particles can remain suspended in the air for several hours. The target organ of the tuberculosis pathogen is lungs, but it can also affect other parts of the body. When we talk about the symptoms of tuberculosis disease, these can be cough containing blood sputum, weight loss, fever. So my dear student, it was in brief discussion on the TB. Now we shall study about how investigating officer can prevent himself from getting infected by this disease at a crime scene. Therefore, investigating officer should take following type of precaution at the crime scene while dealing with such kind of case. They should not touch the victim without mask. They should wear proper protective uniform. These are the two important things which can prevent our investigating officer and his team from a crime scene which has been infected by tuberculosis virus. We move on to our new module, that is module 4, another important disease which is also very dangerous and life-threatening, hepatitis B. Dear student, now we will be discussing about hepatitis B at crime scene, how hepatitis transmit and what organs it affects. So, hepatitis is an infectious disease caused by the hepatitis B virus that affect our vital organ liver. When we see the meaning of the hepatitis, it means inflammation of liver. As we know that liver is responsible, so many important functions such as process the nutrient, detoxification, metabolism of drugs and chemicals, filter the food and fight against the infection. Thus, when virus damage or inflame the liver, so it will not work properly. Hepatitis has different forms, commonly referred to as hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. Thus, we have to discuss about the hepatitis B that is common among all the forms of hepatitis. Hepatitis B can cause both acute and chronic infection. It leads different type of chronic symptoms such as jaundice, cirrhosis and liver cancer, but it also leads to acute symptoms, for example, sickness and vomiting, tiredness, yellowish skin, abdominal pain and dark urine. Dear student, as we know that it is caused by a virus and the virus is transmitted by exposure to infectious blood or body fluid. The virus of the disease at the crime scene can be found in the human blood, semen, urine, saliva, cerebrospinal fluid and vaginal secretions. In addition to this, it could also transmit via exposure of mucous membranes to infected people, or if one has ruptured skin, if he comes in contact with an infected person, or one could catch infection. For the sake of convenience, we can study the spread of this virus in points. Injection. This is the commonest form to spread the virus from one person to another. Moreover, when one shares needles, syringes and other equipments equivalent to these, one can get infected. Outbreak. It leads the infection during the healthcare settings. Genetically, it can also get transferred from one generation to the another generation. If mother is infected, so she can pass it to her baby also. So my dear student, hepatitis cannot spread through breastfeeding, wearing clothes, sharing utensils, hugging, holding and shaking hands, coughing or sneezing. Thus, hepatitis B is considered a deadliest killer and very serious disease. Therefore, while dealing with the crime scene supposed to be infected with this virus, investigating officer and their team should take precaution whenever and whatever is needed. So, we have discussed in the previous module. Module 5, Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome or HIV or AIDS. Dear student, now we will study about another deadliest disease. It is common nowadays. AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, that is caused by human immunodeficiency virus or HIV, which destroys and attacks the immune system, or we can say certain white blood cells that are essential for the body immune system. This is a retrovirus which invades the victim's own DNA and affects his or her immune system. In addition to this, when HIV infects cell, it combines with the cell's genetic material and may lie in such condition for several years. When it gets activated, it will lead to severe destructive symptoms such as weakness of immune system or illness. But in all symptoms, pneumonia is a common infection of AIDS patient. Dear student, now we will have a brief discussion about the route of onset of virus. As of date, we know that there are only 4 primary routes of infection by HIV. Let's start one by one. Physical relation. Contaminated blood and blood products, organs and tissues. This another route of transmission is which infected blood is responsible. Infected blood is transfused in the healthy person and he might get infected with this deadly disease. Contaminated needles, syringes and other piercing instruments. These contaminated instruments could spread the virus from an infected person to a healthy person. It is the fact that one is infected or their used instrument is used by another person, therefore one will easily get this infection. Mother to child transmission, MTCT, is the biologically controlled. If mother got infected, so she will pass the disease to her baby. Thus, this is the mother to child transmission of the disease. Now we have understood the primary source of infection. However, there are also other sources of infection such as exposure of any open wounds, injuries and mucous membrane. In addition to this, body fluids also leads to the infection. So, we will study about those things that do not spread the HIV. Sharing, feeling or wearing clothes, shaking hands, hugging, sitting and eating together, coughing or sneezing, using of public phone, visiting a hospital, opening or closing of window, using same washroom, using drinking fountain, using public swimming pool, getting a mosquito or insect bite, utensils, using utensils shared by them. Officers dealing with such type of crime scene should take proper precaution as the crime scene. As we know that at present we don't have any vaccine or medicine which can cure this disease, because we are still in the discovering and experimental phase. So, in this we could conclude that precaution is the best thing. The investigating officer should be well informed and protect himself to get contact with this virus. Now we move on to our next module, module 6, precautions at a crime scene. Now we will learn about the general precautions at a crime scene, because when we come in contact with the crime scene, there are many pathogens waiting for us. So each and every investigating officer has its own guideline and protocol which they have to follow while dealing with the crime scene. These protocols and guidelines are specific guidelines related to the biological and chemical hazards. These guidelines could be issued by different leading laboratories, organizations and agencies. For example, in India, Directorate of Forensic Science Services or Bureau of Police Research and Development issue the guidelines for forensic scientists from time to time. So my dear student, by following and practicing these guidelines, crime scene investigating officer and their team could perform their function and necessary activities, and they can also minimize the risk of contamination. Thus, we will study what type of precaution one should take at crime scene. Another thing is that these precautions should be enforced routinely and strictly. Let's start one by one. One should consider the whole crime scene is infectious or infected. Investigating officer should not touch any object with bare hands. Investigating officer must consider all the blood and biological fluid, whether they are wet or dry, infectious. All piercing instruments such as needles, syringes, razor blades, knife should be picked up with handle with utmost caution and place them in a container carefully. After doing all the activities at the crime scene, one should wash their hands properly using fresh running water. If investigating officer has any open wound or cut or any injury, he or she should use a bandage and cover it completely. One should use the latex gloves while handling the crime scene or blood and other biological fluids. After finishing the work, investigating officer dispose the gloves properly, or for the next work should use another one or a new one. One should use the good hygiene protection against the infectious disease. Investigating officer must avoid the face-to-face contact or direct contact with the victim. One should also avoid eating, drinking, smoking or chewing at the crime scene. Exposing parts of the body must be immediately washed and wiped with. While dealing with the sharp instrument, one should be very alert. So my dear student, it was all about the general guidelines for the investigating officer which should be followed at the crime scene. After reading them, investigating officer could make them aware of all these precautions. Let's move towards our next module, that is specific guidelines for the crime scene investigating officer. Before reaching at crime scene, one should go through the protocol book for the awareness and about the protection of them from pathogens. Before conducting crime scene search, investigating officers should wear gloves and gowns. If investigating officer is lifting the dead body or coming in contact with the victim, at that time one should be wearing latex glove, eye covering, surgical mask and a gown. One should use the double latex gloves, surgical mask and protective eye when handling or the biological fluids and the blood, dead bodies and evidences those containing biological fluids. In case of mass disaster, while taking proper precaution and covering their body, one should not enter at the crime scene or touch even a single evidence. When searching for the evidence at crime scene, one should be alert for contaminated fluid and pathogen sites. One should not place their hands in direct contact with those areas which are highly contaminated and unable to see while conducting a search. If this is necessary, so one should deal with all kind of protection. If aerosol or airborne pathogens are encountered at the crime scene, in this condition, one should wear surgical mask or face mask with appropriate filters or cartridges. During the time of recognition, collecting and handling physical evidence, care must be exercised. After collecting biological fluid in container, label should be maintained by writing a symbol or hazardous sign. Biological fluid stained cloth should be dried in shadow, then packed in double bags and labeled properly. If the person is suspected for any deadliest disease during the time of collection, it should be labeled as physical evidence clearly that contaminated with certain disease. Investigating officer must take different type of precautions in different cases. After using the cloth, one should dispose them off at a proper site. One must wash and wipe their whole body. So dear student, it was all about the specific guidelines to the investigating officer and their team member. In any condition, they has to follow all these points. Now we will move for our next module, that is the conclusion. Dear student, in this lecture, we have learned about the biohazards at crime scene, how investigating officer can protect themselves from them. We also have learned what are biohazards and what type of biohazards are commonly encountered at crime scene. Moreover, we have also learned about the biohazards transmission, target organ and their symptoms. In the last, we explained the general guideline for the crime scene investigating officer and their team member. In general guideline, we study about the material that is needed for performing the activity at crime scene. In the last module, we learned about the specific guideline for investigating officers. A specific guideline stated about the different cases in which we has to follow. With all these information here, we come to the end of today's important lecture. Do keep in mind what we have discussed today. It's time for you all to do some self-study. This is Professor Devashish Bose signing off for today. If you want to learn more and enhance your knowledge, you may log on to our website for MCQs, quizzes and LORs at www.cec.nic.in. Till then, goodbye and thank you.